Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of the Way Between podcast. Thank you to our co-host, Nick Egan, for coming on today.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really happy to have you today because we're going to look at the story of the life of the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, Buddha from Sakyamuni clan. And I figure what I'll do is I know you know so many different versions of this story with so much depth, and I just know a few simple. So I figure what I'll do is I'll go through and kind of explain. And this is really another one of these examples of where we want this podcast to be able to be very digestible for people who have never even heard this story before, or
Mhm.
people who have heard it a million times and just kind of want to tune into this podcast to recalibrate and reorient some of their philosophy and spirituality type of practice and discussion.
Yeah.
So on that note, I think what I'll do is I'll just start on one of my simple versions of Siddhartha's story and check in with you and see how I'm doing, and then at the end see what I'm very interested to see what additions you have to help us out with.
Yeah, let's do it. That sounds exciting.
So
Actually,
from
first, before we even
yeah,
jump in, it's Siddhartha. A lot of people say it's Siddhartha because it's THA, but like that Siddha means accomplishing and Artha means benefit for others. So it's Siddhartha, Siddhartha, like that. So it's an
good. Just
aspirated TH.
so I'm already screwing up even that just basic thing.
You and every other, it's like I'm in English, we always say Siddhartha, but it's Siddhartha.
Siddhartha. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can remember that. And I think that's something that happens just with even the stuff that I don't know if this happens with you, but even the stuff that we studied the most deeply, like there's details I get wrong all the time. I go back, I'm like, what was I thinking? Like I won't get into some of them, but that's why it's always nice to have conversation, have people around to keep you
Oh
on
man,
point.
I was looking at my dissertation the other day and just thinking like I made a couple of really ridiculous errors and just thinking like, man, what was I have no clue what I was thinking making that mistake. So it happens all the time. And there's stuff that, I'm still learning every day. It's such a broad topic. You can study for literally decades and not come to any real you can feel like there's still stuff to learn all the time is
Well,
what
I
I'm
think
trying
that's
to say.
a while we're kind of leaning into that point, I think it's really important for all of us to keep in mind because there's the letter of the law and there's the spirit of the law. And I
Hmm.
think as we're looking at this way between podcasts, what's important for all of us in our practice and in our studies is that we are, for example, we took classes in our graduate program, which I'm very thankful for, and they were called the Essence and Development of Hinduism or
Hmm.
the Essence and Development of Chinese Philosophy. So I think the important thing is to always make sure we're looking at the essence of different philosophy, the way it develops in society, and the way the essence, resonates with us, and the way
Hmm.
it develops in ourselves too.
Yeah. No,
So
that's great.
on that note, as we look at the story of Siddhartha, of course, like all of our different philosophy we look at here, we want to. Did I say it right that time, Siddhartha?
Close. Yeah, you got it. You got it.
Okay. As we look at the story of Siddhartha, okay,
Yeah.
we want to keep in mind how that feels relating to our life in modern times. And I think I know we'll circle back at the end and we'll see a couple key points that I have in mind that I want
Hmm.
to look at. Um, so without further ado, this story begins in ancient India, uh, around 1000 BC,
About 500 BC.
500
Yeah.
BC. Yeah, 500 BC. A side point, there's so many interesting things that happen across the globe in that couple centuries, philosophically. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole theory of like the axial age, AXIAL. And so it revolves around like that period of, I would say 450 BC to 550 BC, kind of in there. And it's like you have people like, Lao Tzu was around, the pre-Socratics were around, Buddha was there. So there's a lot of stuff happening.
Confucius too. And so I
Hmm.
think that what that points to, we talked about in a previous podcast, is I feel like there was an element of people coming together and exploring how to live. And out of that, a lot of wisdom came forth and some real insightful, powerful people came through. And in this case, Siddhartha was in utero,
Hmm.
and his father was a powerful king.
Hmm.
His father was obviously very interested in the destiny of his son and had a, we can maybe call it fortune teller type,
Hmm.
come to the palace to tell him, okay, what's going on with my son? What will he be like? And the fortune teller told him that your son will either be a very powerful ruler or a great spiritual teacher. And the father, of course, upon hearing this, wanted his son to be a powerful ruler. So the father set forth on making the life for Siddhartha so enjoyable that everything he saw in the palace, which massive, massive palace, we have to kind of keep that in mind, would just be so enjoyable that he wouldn't really want to care about spiritual things. That he would just be enjoying his life in the palace. He would have the finest things around him, the best education, and he went to such an extreme that everything in the palace was meticulously cared for, beautiful. Not a single dead thing was allowed to be seen, not a dead flower or leaf. Everything in the palace, everyone in the palace was beautiful. And Siddhartha grew up this way. Siddhartha grew up this way. So at a certain point, of course, Siddhartha became very curious about the outside world and had an attendant take him into a nearby city. When they arrived in the nearby city, Siddhartha witnessed the first really shocking moment. He saw someone in the city who was incredibly old,
Hmm.
the oldest person you could possibly imagine. And of course, this was a huge shock to Siddhartha. He had
Yeah.
never seen anything like this, not even a dying flower, let alone a dying person. And so when he saw this person, just as oldest person you can imagine, frail, wrinkly, balding, he asked the attendant he was with, what in the world is going on with this person? And the attendant told Siddhartha, Prince Siddhartha, this person is experiencing old age.
Mhm.
This is what actually will happen to every single person. If they live long enough, they will start to appear like this. Their body will weaken. So this was a huge, huge shock to Prince Siddhartha. He returned to the palace and had took a long time to process this. It was completely just knocked his world upside down. He was almost like depressed and didn't know how to deal with this information. And then he couldn't believe that we were all going to experience this and that everyone knew that was what was going to happen. He didn't even know that. So how am I doing so far?
Great. Yeah. So far, so
Okay.
good. Yeah.
And so it took Siddhartha a while to process this, and in the end, what happened was he was determined to go back into the city and learn more. If he didn't know about this old age situation, then what else did he not know? So
Mhm.
he went back out with the attendant into the city again, asked him to take him back out into the city again. And this time, another shocking sight was there for him to behold. It was someone who was incredibly sick.
Mhm.
And so you picture someone who's just almost, completely decaying and all the different symptoms of illness you could see on them. This is all very shocking for Siddhartha to see. And he asked the attendant, what's going on with this person? This is so weird. They're not old, but clearly they're having some real issues here. And the attendant told him this person is very ill. This person's body is in a lot of trouble, and this could happen to anyone at any time. So again, this was incredibly shocking to Prince Siddhartha. He went back to the palace and had to process this new information too, that now anyone he saw, they were not only going to get old in time, but they could actually, in himself included, could get sick at any time. So he again felt really depressed and had to process this information for some time and similar pattern. And in the end, he decided, well, I still want to go back out and I still want to learn more. I can't stay in ignorance anymore. He's like craving to know what's really going on out there. So this time he enters the city and it's a very different environment. The entire town is basically shut down and having a procession through the street. Now in the procession, in the middle of the procession, there is a platform with a body on kind of like a funeral platform, and they're taking this funeral procession through the town. So Prince Siddhartha says, "Wow, what is going on? Everyone is making this racket. There's mournful music. There's people that are crying and wailing and making this terrible racket. How can that person in the middle sleep through all of that?" And so the attendant tells him, Prince Siddhartha, this person is not asleep. This person has passed away. This person is no longer alive. This person has died.
Mhm.
And so, of course, Prince Siddhartha was completely shocked once again. And at this time, he looked to his attendant. How can this be? Does everyone know this is going to happen? You know? And so Prince Siddhartha finds out that this is the fate of all human beings
Mhm.
and that all human beings know this could happen. So, of course, this time he went back to the palace and all three of these shocks came together in the ultimate shock that we're destined for this death. And
Mhm.
he looked around at the palace and everything had lost its luster to him. He
Mhm.
could not imagine living in the palace that way any longer.
Yeah. There's a fourth shock,
Yes, I remember
actually.
this one.
Yeah, the fourth shock is on his way back from death, from seeing death. He
Oh,
sees a mendicant or like
yes,
a professional spiritual person, not quite
yes.
a monk, so we're not sure exactly what, but let's say a spiritual, a meditator. And he asks the charioteer, his friend, Chanda, what is going on with this person? He says, oh, that's a spiritual practitioner. He's different than other people. That's why he has sort of a positive aura about him.
Yeah, I always tell it as they went back and goes back a fourth time. So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know that he saw that on the way back. And this had a profound impact on him because he saw someone who, like you said, has an aura.
Hmm.
When he comes upon this person, he sees that they have just such peace and happiness and joy and like this inward smile.
Hmm.
And when he asked his friend, don't they know about these other three shocking things? He said, yes, they know, but they've transcended them, so to speak.
Yeah.
Could you say something about the language of how they
Yeah.
describe him and how they describe the state that he's in?
Peaceful is how they describe peaceful, and I want to say it was his countenance, meaning like it was his. There's a sense in ancient writings that you can actually see the peacefulness in a strong practitioner, that it's visible in a physical or semi-physical state. But I want to just say a quick. That was great telling. It's important to know
Excuse me.
that Siddhartha, and we're calling him Siddhartha because he's not yet the Buddha. He's not yet Shakyamuni,
Mm.
right? So that was his first name when he was a prince. So Siddhartha's father recognized that if you see the cracks in samsara is the Buddhist notion that, unenlightened life. If you see the cracks in unenlightened life, then you'll naturally be drawn to a spiritual path. And it's important to know that that actually is the beginning of the spiritual path. So it's like you have to be a little bit dissatisfied with
Mm.
ordinary reality or our
Mm.
experience of ordinary reality to want to go after the spiritual path. And so you have to see those cracks in society, in ourselves, in our experience of the world. And that's the thing that leads you there. So Shuddodana, his father, King Shuddodana's plan was to like, well, I'll just have there be no cracks. But there's a really important lesson in there because samsara always has cracks.
Mm.
Samsara never works.
Mm. Mm.
Samsara,
Mm.
ordinary, like unenlightened life, never, it is by definition dissatisfying. And so, but yet we keep going again and again to come back like, oh, why isn't samsara working out for me? Like this time it should work. It's like we keep going again and again and again. It's like, no, it never works. So
And the king had the most power to try. I mean, it just shows the most extreme example of trying to make the world and make, samsara, let's just say samsara, trying to make it the most attractive as possible. And he had the ability and the power to try and, lock it up and make it seem so attractive, and it still didn't work.
totally. Yeah, he was like, I don't know if you saw the Seinfeld episode a long time ago, like Bubble Boy. He was like Siddhartha was the ultimate bubble boy, like stay in the bubble, but
Yeah.
it doesn't work because samsara comes from us, right?
Mm,
It's
mm,
our projection of unenlightened life that
mm,
we're experiencing
mm,
constantly.
mm.
So yeah, please carry on.
Well, no, I'm interested. Let's look at this. I had a moment as a teenager where I was dissatisfied with puppy love,
Uh,
and I decided to explore, such as it was, a little bit of spirituality, and that just grew from there and
mhm,
philosophy. And I think because of that, maybe some resonance came through, and I was fortunate enough to have different teachers appear for me.
mhm.
I want to ask you, did you have a similar notion of that as you were beginning? I know you've been practicing Buddhism for over 30 years now.
Yeah. So when I was really young, I had what I would consider some beginner level mystical type experiences. But the thing that I think led me to a spiritual path or practicing Buddhism as such, in this, not that I'm an accomplished practitioner by any means, but being drawn to it was that my dad had a congenital heart and lung issue. And so he was born, quite unhealthy and always told, by doctors. I have letters from doctors at Stanford saying, you won't live past 18. And so he was told that he would not live. And because of that, it caused him, I think, to be a little bit more aware of the possibility of death at any point. And I knew that I knew that, growing up. And I saw that ultimately, like, even if you accomplish great wealth, great power, great whatever, death is looming there. And so, like, figuring out what the answer is to death, or what happens post death, or why should we even care? Like, what is even the benefit of death? And thinking along those lines, it naturally leads one to at least explore what I think are the ultimate answers to some of those questions.
Oh man, thanks for sharing that. That's really profound, and I could see how that would be so impactful, obviously. So how does Siddhartha deal with it then? Let's look at that. What does he do next? Okay, well, I think you could,
No, yeah,
yeah, why
go
don't you
ahead.
tell this part?
No, please go ahead. You got it. You're doing great. Awesome.
Well,
I love hearing it.
I will, but I'm also really happy to hear your perspective on this as I finish, I guess, because I know you in the past you and I have discussed this and it's been very insightful, your perspective. But what happens first is that Siddhartha sees this mendicant, also I think sometimes we call him an ascetic, right?
Yeah.
And it's a forest dweller, a mukti,
Hmm.
different words, right? So it's in India at this time, as we previously discussed, there are many people who are able to, and society is kind of built around allowing people to retire and seek a spiritual path. Society supports them and offers them food and offers them support and shelter. Like in the forest, they have huts and stuff like that, and they can go out begging, and people will support them because they want to please get some spiritual insight. Devote yourself to this, almost like you're a spiritual warrior protecting the front line, and come back
Yeah,
and give us insight into our town.
that's right.
So this is one such person, and Siddhartha decides that he's going to leave the palace and become one himself.
Mhm.
So Siddhartha does leave the palace and he enters into the forest and he finds a group of these mendicants and he begins to practice a life of extreme asceticism.
Well,
He,
not hold on. There's a couple.
yes,
So let me interject a little bit here. First, it's important to know, and this comes up as a modern critique of Siddhartha. I was just looking at some of this. Somebody was posting something on a platform. It's important to know that he had a son. So Siddhartha was married and had a son, and it was very difficult for him to come back and leave the palace thinking about his son. And so a lot of the stories will say, like, well, it actually that was the hardest part, leaving his child. And it's important to think of why he was doing that. It wasn't just for him. It actually was motivated out of great compassion. So the texts are very clear on this. Like, he literally would think, well, that death, that sickness, that old age, that happens to me, but it will also happen to my son. And so it was the motivation of compassion for his child that he went off to do it. Just in the same way that, like, a family that's stricken by poverty, let's say, and the husband decides, like, well, I'm going to go work in another land, another country, and maybe in the mine, something difficult where I'll be away. Uh, it's a heroic thing because he's doing it mostly for his family. And then Siddhartha was doing it not just for his own self and his son, but for everybody. He was trying to find the answer for everybody. So there's this motivation of compassion. He did leave. And then what you're talking about is he gets to this level where he's with these five ascetics doing extreme asceticism. He actually studied with two other teachers before that. So he went off and he went to study with more conventional meditation teachers. And essentially, like, in a very short amount of time, they're like, "Oh, you've got it. You've attained. You're like my heir apparent. Stay on and become a teacher." And he's like, "No, I don't quite have it yet." So he did that twice. And then he gets to the point where he goes to these really, like, the most hardcore Navy SEALs, like hardcore asceticism. Like, I'm going to eat a grain of rice, like 1 grain of rice per day. The most hardcore. So that's where he picks up. So keep going.
so that yeah, that's what we were getting to. I really appreciate that perspective because it's very important to take note of that. I mean, and they almost glossed over it. It's like if you think about what is he going through, he's like, what do we do faced with these things?
Yeah.
And there's nothing else in this life that is more pressing. Like, why
Mm-hmm.
would anyone else not be looking into this? We all have to deal with this stuff. It's like, I need to learn this. Like you said, not just for himself, but for his family, even his father, his mother, and everyone.
And that's the great irony of what his father Shuddha did. It was like because he had withheld all of those things from him, it was this huge shock to the system. Whereas ordinary people like you and I, usually we it gets dribbled out like, oh yeah, that's a common thing. Like we all get sick and all that. But because he had this huge shock to the system, it was like, why are we allowing this to continue? What's going on here? I want to find a solution for this in some capacity. So it's like the very thing, the bubble itself was part of the cause that led him to go on this great spiritual journey.
Yeah, and when you're describing that, and when you're describing your upbringing, knowing about your father's situation, it also comes to mind where I remember, and maybe many of us can remember. I know my wife has a similar story where you're around five. I was around 5 or 6 years old, and the idea that, oh my God, we're gonna die. And my
Hmm.
dad's gonna die, my mom's gonna die. And my mom was very religious. So it was
Hmm.
like, are you gonna go to heaven? And I was like,
Hmm.
is my dad gonna go to heaven? Because he wasn't in my mom's cult.
Hmm.
So I was sad. I'm very sad,
Yeah.
and all this kind of thing. So 5 or 6 years old, this stuff dribbling out. And if we
Hmm.
think back on it, we all probably had these really intense experiences when we were younger about, oh my gosh, oh, my cat died,
Hmm.
or my goldfish died, and what the heck is that all about? Which Prince Siddhartha did not have.
Hmm. Yeah,
So,
exactly.
what the part of the story that I remember being emphasized, and like you guys can see how excellent Nick's knowledge is of this, and how in depth he knows about this type of thing. But the part of the story I remember is that he does practice for years and years and years, and what happens is, I think his psychology is that the body betrays us. The body gets sick and gets old and dies. This physical world you can't trust. So I can't stay in the palace anymore. I can't seek physical anything anymore. I need to seek only spiritual. So in this sense, he goes into a practice of denying the physical, denying the body, to the point where he is only surviving on what I've heard, 1 grain of rice per day after years and years. Siddhartha's very talented. As
Hmm.
Nick was mentioning earlier, he was a very talented meditator. He was
Hmm.
very talented when he was in the palace as an archer and a scholar, I believe.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right.
so he takes up asceticism, and over a course of a few years, he's so talented, he's able to survive off 1 grain of rice.
Hmm.
So in this point, of course, he's denying the body so much, so his body becomes very frail in a sense. I mean, physically, his body is emaciated. And so there's a time when he goes to take his grain of rice or whatnot. But anyway, the point is more importantly that he goes to meditate, and they say he could feel his spine when he puts his hands on his belly to meditate. And at this point, he actually passes out. And what I've heard is a wandering adolescent girl comes by, and in the Zen tradition, they offer a bowl of congee because that's very important in Chinese. So he takes a bowl of rice soup, and he feels so much better, like
That's
euphoric.
so funny.
Yeah.
It's yogurt in the Tibetan tradition.
I-
And I always that's interesting because I want to go back. I always just assumed it was yogurt because that's
it
how
makes more
I
sense, of
well
course.
it makes a lot more sense, but it's so funny that there are different versions of that, like rice porridge versus congee. And
Yeah.
it's like and it's not the girl is actually an emanation of the gods. And she, according to like Tibetan tradition, and the yogurt that she gives him isn't just regular yogurt. It's like super powerful, fantastic yogurt that gives him back all of his like health.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
I would say, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong because I didn't study this in depth, but I would say in the Zen tradition it's kanji, and it shows that even the most simple soup, now that he's nourishing himself, has such
Hmm.
a profound effect.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so I don't know, but anyway, point is, regardless of who provided it, what it was nourishing, and it was so
Hmm.
nourishing that he felt euphoric.
Hmm.
And and in this state of euphoria, he said, one, his first major insight of Buddhist teaching, I would say, came through was the middle way.
Hmm.
The middle way between the extreme luxury of the palace, extreme asceticism of denying the body all the way to 1 grain of rice.
Hmm.
And for this episode, I think we should really look at the middle way, and we'll kind of finish the story of Siddhartha, checking on our time here. But we can always use the middle way. I just wrote an article for Buddhist Door Global, and it's about using the middle way to deal with technology. But
Mm,
anyway, we can circle back on that, but I'd like people to take this moment and maybe use and contemplate on using the middle way in their own life, seeing the middle way in their own life. And in this
mm,
case, it's the middle way between extreme indulgence and extreme denial.
mhm.
So for AI, for my story, it was extreme, like AI is going to save the world or AI is going to destroy the world. It's okay. We can have a middle way between.
Yeah, yeah. Middle way between. There's so after Siddhartha takes the yogurt or congee, whatever it is,
Sure, it's yogurt.
there's more that happens. So he gives up asceticism and his five, friend, they'd become his students actually. So he was so good, he was so talented at everything. He was like the leader, he
His
became the
first
leader.
students, right?
Yeah, well, they came back and they were the ones that heard the Four Noble Truths.
Yeah.
So he's like, look, asceticism, it's weakening the body. It's giving me these spiritual sort of powers or insights, but it's not giving me the thing that I know is there. And so then he goes off and meditates under the Bodhi tree. So he gets up and moves, and he moves and he goes to the Bodhi tree. Bodhi means enlightenment. So it's a specific kind of tree, a ficus religiosa. So it's a ficus tree. It's in the fig family. Big tree, big branches, a lot of shade, which is important in India. And he meditates there. And Mara, so Mara is like the demon boogeyman in Buddhism, but actually Mara is a reflection of our own ego. So Mara is our own limitations. It's the part of us that doesn't want us to actually succeed in this because it keeps us limited. So that's why we identify it more with like the ego or the small self and all of that. And he sends like these threatening things, these like seductive, he sends his daughters, they talk about it and they like do these sexy dances and all of this stuff to try to get him. Basically, he's promising, just in the same way Satan in the desert promised Jesus like a kingdom, he's promising Buddha, you could basically be the ruler of everything, with the power that you have now. Just stop now and we'll work on it together. But Buddha just ignores him. There's this famous scene where, Mara says, well, who do you think you are to attain enlightenment, essentially? And he says, well, who is your witness, Buddha? Or who is your witness, Siddhartha? And he says, the earth is my witness. And he reaches down and touches the earth. And in some texts, the goddess of the earth herself comes up and says, yes, I have witnessed him many lifetimes doing this. And then that just like eradicates Mara. Mara's gone. Then that night, the moon rises. And when the moon rises, he sees the full moon, Siddhartha does. And in that moment, he grasps enlightenment, and then he says something along the lines of, I understand it now. It's a profound, luminous, and uncompounded dharma. And dharma in this sense means truth. A profound, luminous, uncompounded, meaning not made up of two things, truth. And then he sits and continues to meditate on that. That's the actual moment of enlightenment. And then he goes off to teach those five ascetics who they saw him coming and they're like, oh, there's old Siddhartha
Well, let's
again.
stop there because
Yeah.
first of all, I'm really happy that you took the lead on that part because the way you describe it is so much more beautiful. And I don't know the religious aspect of it as well about the demons. I knew about Mara, but I do want to say what I remember before we move on
Yeah.
is that there's one last temptation. And the last temptation is that along the lines of you're saying, who are you, so to speak, but who like just stay here. Just stay in this blissed out state of nirvana.
Yeah.
Don't go back to the real world. No one will understand. Like, why
Mhm.
would you want to go anywhere else? Just stay here.
Mhm.
And what I remember in the story is Siddhartha it is his biggest temptation, his most tempting thought. He's like, how can anyone understand this? It's wordless. It's beyond compounding, right? And then
Yeah.
and then what I remember is he says, no, there will be some who understand. And then he moves from the Bodhi tree to go teach.
Yeah, so it's even more interesting, I think, than that. It's not, it's he himself that says, so that's post enlightenment. So that's not a temptation. So he attains enlightenment and he's basically like, no one will understand this because it's beyond words. That's it. And then the gods of ancient Hinduism, the Brahmanical gods come down. So Brahma himself, Vishnu himself, Indra himself all come down. You can see this in paintings and stuff. And they're like, hey, Buddha, you got the juice, man. Teach.
Yeah.
And Buddha's like, no one will get it. And they're like, there are some that will get it. And then because of that, like the gods themselves, it's super interesting when you read the actual text. It's like, please, Buddha, go teach. And he's like, no, no one's gonna get it. No, there are a few there. And the analogy that they use is there are a few lotuses that are just poking above or just ready to poke above the water.
Love it.
And those lotuses will blossom.
Love it.
And so that's why, and that's when he goes and teaches. Yeah, that's you're exactly right.
I've been using that image of the lotuses to I had one difficult student one time that thought Eastern philosophy was just kind of like a cop out. And
Mm-hmm.
I had to describe that this is not he was used to Western philosophy trying to sell him stuff or Western culture trying to sell him stuff. I said, Eastern philosophy is not like that. It's like the grass is green. Go experience it.
Mm-hmm.
Go see the green grass.
Mm-hmm.
Go, you experience it. It's like, here's enlightenment. This is a thing, it's a fact. Go experience it. And so if you decide that you don't want to, you're only hurting yourself. You're
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna miss out on the most important part of life, basically. And I use the lotus image that you're describing here as that all people are at different states of readiness to hear this type of dharma. So it's interesting that I now know more of where this image comes from, and the fact that when you're really ready, you're right at the surface, and your lotus is about to bloom. But some people could be all the way down by the muck or somewhere in between.
Yeah, that's so they talk about like there's 84,000 teachings in Buddhism, and that's just code for a lot, right? It just
Yeah,
means like it's like millions and millions. And actually, I was just talking to a friend about this. When it comes down to it, there really is only one essential teaching. So it's like, how do you recognize in Dzogchen and Mahamudra, how do you recognize the nature of mind? In Zen, they're going to talk about it as ordinary mind. There's different language around it, but there's only one thing. Everything else is actually just leading up to that one thing. I don't care if it's mantras, visualization,
jeez.
Kundalini type energy work, mindfulness of the breath, all that stuff is only leading up to the one thing, which is the realization that Siddhartha had, which is the truth beyond the polarities of ordinary and non-ordinary. And that's the luminous, uncompounded Dharma.
Very, very profound, very profound. And Siddhartha then goes to, because of this inspiration even from the gods, and I think that the
Well,
connection.
now he's Buddha. So
Yes,
now we
thank
got
you,
to
thank
call him.
you.
So now we got to call him Buddha.
I
Shakyamuni. So Shakya means his clan, and Muni means the sage of the Shakya clan. So now he's a Buddha.
Thank you for reminding me. And I'll
Yeah.
probably make that mistake again. I had that thought as you were talking earlier, and I I already slipped up. Sometimes they say Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, though. That's
Yeah,
okay, because
Gautama is
there's
just
other
a.
Buddhas
Yeah, there are. Usually, you don't. That's not as common. It's possible. You can say that. Yeah.
or Lord Buddha.
Lord Buddha or Shakyamuni Buddha or Tathagata or
Mm,
Dajina. There's
mm.
lots of different. It's usually by that time he goes by titles, right?
So how are we on time? Do you think we can get into the Four Noble Truths, or should we
I
save that?
oh geez. I mean, we can go another 15 minutes. I don't know if that works for you.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great because I like to, and I honestly like to end this story with the Lotus sermon. I don't know if we'll have that much time, but
Oh man, that's big.
yeah,
Yeah,
that
I don't
that's
know if we're gonna have Lotus Sutra and the Four Noble Truths.
not
Big.
Lotus Sutra, but the Lotus sermon. You know what I mean?
With Mahakasyapa,
Yes,
where he
yes,
says
yes.
this is the flat. Yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah.
different, right? Than
Gotcha. Yeah,
Lotus
yeah.
Sutra. Yeah.
It's different. Yeah.
So anyway, we'll probably have to wait till next time and start to use that as our jumping off point into Zen tradition. But maybe this time we just allude to it so we have a
Mhm.
bridge. But when Siddhartha leaves the Bodhi tree and he goes back to teach, uh, Nick knows more of the details. He goes to teach the ascetics. The way I first heard the story was more simple, and it was that he goes to teach, but the point is his first teaching is that life as it is ordinarily lived is something called dukkha, Dukkha. And this is often translated as suffering. But the image that we have with this life is dukkha is actually like a clay wheel that's off its axis, or any kind of wheel that's lost its axle. So life as an ordinary live is like disoriented, off balance, off kilter. So the first noble truth he teaches that life as it ordinarily is lived is this dukkha. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's exact. Unenlightened life is by definition suffering. Yeah.
And then the second noble truth is the cause is desire.
Yes. The cause is Trishna. So the
The
Sanskrit
cause of
word
this
is
disorientation.
Trishna is means like a thirst, a desire. But what causes the thirst or desire is avidya, which is like it means ignorance, ignorance or delusion. And the ignorance or delusion, what are you ignorant of? You're ignorant of this uncompounded dharma, which is how we truly are. So you're ignorant of how you actually exist.
Do you think I often have this image when I'm telling the story that it's like we're ignorant of the axis. We're ignorant of the axle. We're ignorant of the center. So our desire is getting us off balance and we're oriented towards our desire. We're living on the outside of the wheel, spinning around, spinning around, spinning around. And that's causing disorientation. And we'll later learn the third noble truth is that there's a cessation, there's a way out, and then the way out is the eightfold path. But the image that comes to mind is that the desire is so disorienting, and we're ignorant of our center. We're ignorant of our uncompounded truth at the center of ourself that's beyond desire.
Yeah, you can look at the desire as reinforcing the ignorance or the delusion that we're separate or that we're unenlightened essentially. Or you can look at it as the delusion creates the desire. The delusion that we are separate and not enough and not unenlightened creates us seeking or craving different things. So it's sort of like, to use an analogy, I don't realize that I am completely nourished and healthy in my current state. And I think that I have to go like eat a bunch of chocolate. And then the chocolate makes me feel bad. And then I'm like, oh, okay, I guess this is a terrible analogy now,
Oh, it's good. I
but
get
because everybody's like, oh, chocolate's great. I hate Buddhism now. Uh, but I
it.
do want to say, like, it's important to be so there's the truth of suffering, right? Unenlightened life is suffering. The truth of the cause of suffering, which is delusion creates a seeking out, a
Yes, thank
thirst
you
for
for
other things. And
reminding me.
then there's the truth, the third noble truth, cessation means stopping. And it doesn't actually necessarily mean a way out, right? So it's important to know that like there are certain elements of Buddhism that do talk about nirvana as like a place, but we're going to use the Mahayana, so the great vehicle kind of understanding. And it's not really like there's a way to get out of it. There's just a way to be with things that allows them to unfold as the natural display of our own enlightened mind. And that's a very different way of, I think what your troubled student was talking about was like, well, I don't want to be this quietist guy that's like meditating up in a mountain and just like for myself trying to get out. And instead, it's like, well, what are you doing for reality? What are you doing for society? And so there is that. So once you realize the truth of uncompounded Dharma, then it's like the unfolding of the nature of reality is quite different than unenlightened, which is suffering. It's actually bliss, sukha, and not dukkha. So,
And I appreciate you making these early distinctions early on because oftentimes when I'm telling this story, I'm using kind of the most basic,
mm,
common English translations that we had to kind of work through that are problematic. And so
mhm,
you've cut off two major issues that come up in Buddhism. First, that Siddhartha left his son, and second, that Buddhism is pointing towards somewhere outside of you.
mhm,
And these we'll see as we look into Confucianism, these become critiques in later and on in China. And it's something for anyway, not to get too in depth there. But I was wondering, and I kind of misspoke a little bit about desire, but does my image hold of like the delusion has us living kind of outside of ourselves almost like our true self is like the axis and the spoke and in the axle of the wheel and we have a center and that the delusion is something that has us kind of living on the outside of it spinning around through like the wheel of karma so to speak maybe
yeah, it's
first.
very good. It's very good. And again, going to there's different movements and both philosophical and also kind of practice movements within Buddhism. So it's important. I want to just call back to the people that are following along that are maybe a bit more have been practicing for a while. This is very much like a Dzogchen in the Tibetan tradition. Dzogchen, Mahamudra, Zen, six Vajra yogas within, uh, call it chakra. Like all of it from this perspective, it fits very nicely with what you're saying. And the idea, one of the ideas actually from the Dzogchen Tantras is they talk about it as a lamp. So it's a lamp with five holes in it. So imagine that there's a lit, very strong candle, and then you put something over it, but it's only got five holes in it, and then it's projecting out into a room all these images, right? Kind of like Plato's cave.
Hmm.
And so the analogy is that our awareness, the nature of mind is the flame itself. And we experience the world through our five sense organs,
Mm, mm, mm,
but it's actually just a projection from our own consciousness. So our
mm.
experience of the world is a projection. So it fits very nicely with what you're saying, if you can get to the center of the wheel. And what I could say is if you understand that you are the lamp, everything else is just a manifestation of your own consciousness.
Nice, nice. Um, so let's wrap this up on that note. The first thing that we should look at is that the fourth noble truth, and we would not call it the way out, we call it maybe the way back to center is one way it's in the language we're using now. Maybe
Sure.
the way to stay oriented with your own lamp
Yeah, that's right.
is the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path, I sometimes just kind of, I can't always remember it. I rarely remember all eight, but I almost want to call them in the tradition, the Western translation we most often see. It's called, right action, right
Hmm.
consciousness, right livelihood, right speech, these kind of things. And
Hmm.
sometimes I just tell the students it's the eight rights. It's
Hmm.
just right orientation, a right way of living. And the right way of living is living from the center, maybe.
Yeah, it's so Buddhism. Herbert Gunther, a great early translator, he would always say, and one of my mentors, Stephen Goodman, used to say, Buddhism is nothing but lists. He's a German guy.
It's
And it's
also that
like,
Hinduism too, right? Comes
yeah,
from
yeah.
Hinduism.
Like, and so, yeah, there's these eight, there's the three trainings, and then the base path fruition, there's the eightfold noble path. There's all kinds of different ways of breaking down what should we do. But when you think about it, that's all just path language. So if you think about the Four Noble Truths, it's like, look, okay, unenlightened life is suffering. Check, got it. There's a cause to it, and that cause is delusion. I'm not really sure what that is. That's leading to thirst. There's something happening there. And then is it possible to stop? Yep, I can do that. Okay, well, now what? Now I'm going to do a path. And
Ah,
so the eightfold path is just like, what do I actually do? And so that's one version of it. There's lots of different formulations around like how to actually do something. And a lot of it is going to be dependent on your capacity, right? So like if you're doing advanced Vajrayana Dzogchen type practitioner, your path is going to look very different from somebody else that's a more beginner level type of path. And so sometimes that's a progression. Sometimes, depending on your capacity, you jump right to it, right?
like, okay, so a great segue because what we'll look at next when we jump back into Buddhism and then we'll start to combine it with Chinese philosophy is we'll look at Zen Buddhism.
Mhm.
And the first patriarch of Zen Buddhism is a perfect example of this, where he was, no, spoiler alert, but he was illiterate. He was illiterate, and he was the
Yeah.
lowest on the social totem pole, and he achieved enlightenment just from hearing some lines from the Diamond Sutra. Uh, that getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. I want to go back to this lamp language too, because
Hmm.
the next thing we'll jump off with is the record of the transmission of the lamp. Speaking of Zen tradition.
Hmm.
So the record of the transmission of the lamp shows us the next story we'll look at is that Buddha was like a lamp, like a candle. And he gives a sermon that allowed his enlightenment, his insight to pass to the next in the lineage, Mahakassapa, right?
Hmm.
And they now have two candles, and this
Hmm.
candle can enlighten down the lineage.
Hmm.
So next time when we circle back, we have our three tracks in this podcast. We have Indian, Chinese, and Western, and we'll see how they start to merge as well. We also, most important, before we move on, we should look at, for all of our listeners and for ourselves included, Nick and I included, we should look at how does this practice come into our daily life. So
Hmm.
earlier we talked about how do we look at staying more balanced in the middle way, not going to extremes. This could help our life. I also think that we should look at how, as we go along, we love to always hear comments and different discussions from all of our listeners about how can we orient our lives properly, live from the center, follow a path that's really full of our own lamp and our own center, and not become disoriented as we live our lives in between listening and discussing on our podcast. So those are things that I think we can take into daily life, and we love to hear how those come up for us and for each other and see different examples.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. How do you actually apply, and what does it mean? And I mean, Zen is I would say the tradition that probably most embodies the idea that you can't really think your way to it. right? And that's kind of funny coming from two scholars talking about it. It's like because the limitations of thought are any thought that you have is by definition not infinite, right? And if we're
Yeah.
talking about something that is infinite, a thought can't actually encompass that. And so because of that, thought itself or conceptualization, we could say that's maybe more specific. Conceptualization cannot grasp the non-conceptual.
Yeah, the
And so then,
experience and
yeah,
practice.
right. And then so it's like, well, what the hell do I do with that? And that's where the practice comes in.
Yeah, yeah. So what we want to practice and in time discuss and also hear how the practice went for everyone, hear the ups and downs, hear where this goes into many different lives and
Mhm.
becomes practical and useful. So thank you so much for joining us today on the Way Between podcast, looking at the way between the Buddha and ourselves in this modern time. And thank you so much to Nick for jumping on with us. I just want to say thank you so much for your insight, and it makes it so much more rich having you on. So I appreciate it.
Oh, it's really fun. I'm always happy to do it. So looking forward to the next ones.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.